as you probably heard about, project planning, benefit cost analysis. We do it specifically for environmental economics, but in general, in government spending government dollars, it's something that's in place for a whole bunch of different things. What we do in environmental economics, and if you guys go into this field, is we work on environmental impact statements. So it started with any project that the federal government goes forward with, they needed to put an economic analysis on what the impact on the environment was going to be. That was starting back in the 70s. Now, it's state regulations, it's local regulations, it's a huge business, and that's what people that end up in consulting jobs in our field end up doing. It's like helping to do environmental impact statements. On one side, on the other side, litigating for it, against it. Don't fall asleep because I'm talking. I was talking to the computer, not to you. No, I'm just kidding. So also today, on an aside, we're going to talk about Endangered Species Act, which we've already talked about a bit, but I'll go a little aside on that. And hopefully at the end we'll get to an issue that's called levelized costs, which is related to this benefit cost thing, but related to also talking about low carbon options, which I try and bring in a lot of different lectures. One note today, I'm only having office hours from 10 to 11, so come earlier. I have to go to the airport after that. All right, so we have our big picture. We have government budgets. We have some need to rank our priorities. That's the starting point for benefit cost analysis. That's motivating in this chapter. We're in the next chapter in the book. There's a couple of side boxes that I recommend. I guess we're in chapter 15. Yeah, definitely chapter 15 is thin. It's got the bulleted everything I'll talk about today. It's got some good side boxes, one about ethanol that you should definitely look at. Benefit cost analysis is a big part of what it takes to enact things with environmental regulation. Obviously, it can be manipulated. It's subjective. We pretend that we're scientists, we're coming up with cold hard numbers, and we're building spreadsheets, but like everything else in our society, it can be manipulated. What's in that spreadsheet? I hire you and your firm to make this project go through. You can change what's the fields in your spreadsheet. I hire you as the environmental nonprofit to fight against this project. You're going to up the costs and decrease the benefits. What costs and benefits end up getting included is very subjective. So we'll go through it today, assuming there are some costs and benefits that are clearly there, but in the real world policy case, what gets included is going to be an interpretation of which side you're on. This whole idea of using benefit cost analysis and the different ways of ranking projects is something about efficiency, getting to the efficient point. We're allocating public resources efficiently. We're trying to get the maximum amount of environmental goods, environmental services. We're trying to maximize what we can buy for the least amount of public resources. That's sort of like the thinking behind why we're going to do this. So motivating this, there's a good story in the book about a dam in Tennessee called the Tellico Dam. So it's just a good story because it was early on. It was sort of a turning point when environmental regulations were coming into place. It was when the federal government was starting to face the mandate of new environmental laws that had been passed in the 1970s, and they got to a really high level. And the regulatory agencies that were like, it's our mandate to enforce these environmental laws, had to go all the way. And like, how much power are we going to have as a part of the executive branch of the government? The government is often doing things because there's political pressure from some different constituency making something happen. And this idea of having wide-ranging, nationally covering environmental regulations was a new idea. It had only, the country's 200 years old, and now we have regulations about environmental protections. And how much teeth are they going to have? So there's an area in the middle of the country called the Tennessee Valley Authority that spans a whole bunch of different states. This is a big area that was created in the Depression. Really poor people. It's called Appalachia. The Appalachian Mountains are running through here. People were amongst the poorest people in the United States. Extreme poverty in the Depression. So they created this area, and in the Depression there was a lot of federal spending. Let's build some big public works so that we can create employment here. And these dots are all different power plants that were built. There's dams, there's a series of power plants, and there's a series of nuclear power plants. So the Tennessee Valley Authority is sort of like a consolidated producer of electricity that was run directly by the federal government, and then now it's being turned into a private entity slowly over time, but controls a whole bunch of power. And we now have car factories in Tennessee. Why are there car factories in Tennessee? 30 or 40 years later, there's cheap power. There's still cheap labor, but there's also cheap infrastructure for power. One other aside, in the Tennessee Valley Authority, they owned many plants, one of which was even a coal plant, because Appalachia is a source of coal. In 2008, there was a huge spill of coal, so there was like a pond here that received the coal ash. Within the coal ash, there was mercury and all sorts of heavy metals. A big rain came, there's this little levees and dams that sort of hold back the pond, and this one here just broke. And this is one of the biggest environmental spills in U.S. history. It's not someone that we know as much about because we're not from the Southeast, but it's a huge debacle, and they're still cleaning it up. This is in 2008, and not that much has changed since then. And you can see there's a power plant up here, huge tide of coal ash and slurry full of heavy metals going down this river, flooding homes. Lots of people got displaced. So another part of that is when we talk about this, coal power plant is not without its environmental consequences beyond carbon. We think of nuclear power plants are the ones that have disasters, but this is a coal power plant, standard operation, owned by the government, also has disasters happen. So Tellico Dam, this is it after it's been built. We'll tell a story more before it's been built. Doesn't look that impressive or huge. They had just planned out a network, and so here it is in place on the side channel of a river, and here's the dam that it's created. Here's the dam down here that it's created. Here, look, this person is recreating. That's a recreational value there, right? And there's a dock here. There's a recreational value there. We can see from the satellite that some recreation has been created. So the other character in this figure is a tiny little fish who you can see in the bottom picture is compared to the size of a paperclip called a snail darter. A tiny little fish that was only found downstream of the area, or upstream of the area where they were going to put this dam. So this was the endangered species that came in, and this is sort of the classic question of a fish the size of a paperclip versus a giant concrete dam. And this sort of conversation is more normal to us then, but when it started in the 70s, this was sort of like a revolutionary conversation, that an endangered species that most people hadn't heard of could potentially stop the construction of a dam by the Tennessee Valley Authority, which was the most powerful thing in the area. There's also a story of political power here. Somebody backed it and pushed it and pushed it. His name was Senator Howard Baker. He was from Tennessee. He was a senator for almost 20 years. He was the minority leader of the Senate, and then he was the majority leader of the Senate, and then he was the White House chief of staff for George Bush. So he pushed really hard throughout to keep this dam from the Endangered Species Act. So the Endangered Species Act came into place. They said, we need to protect the snail darter, and this is a federal project where the federal government's paying for this. Let's have a panel review this with a benefit cost analysis. So this powerful senator exempted this project from the Endangered Species Act by an act of the Senate, and the legislative branch can do that. They're not that coordinated to do something like this today, but back then when they were very, very powerful and very consolidated, they could do something like that. So the project is proposed in 1936. There are all these dams. I showed you the picture. You know, there's a whole set of watersheds and dams that are proposed. And so the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, different aspects of Tennessee Valley are built out. This dam, not that important, much smaller, not like integral to it, not going to create that much electricity. They don't get around to doing it until 30 years later. 1967, they're starting to build the dam. The bulldozers are out there. The National Environmental Policy Act, which requires environmental impact statements, is in 1970. So this is the first thing saying that the government needs to have environmental impact statements. Why does it fade like that? Is it like the ink is drying? That's surreal. This NEPA Act requires that environmental impact statements put in place. And then a few years later, the Endangered Species Act is passed. And this was originally not meant to have so much teeth. This was originally meant to be, if the federal government does something, the federal government should consider the impacts of its actions on endangered species. So when the Endangered Species Act was passed, it was sort of seen as like a passive thing of like, let's consider our options to make sure we're not harming species too much. The way that it's sort of used now has a lot more teeth than that. If there's a contentious issue and a contentious species, you can call together a special committee. So they called together a special committee in 1976 to deal with this issue of the snail darter. And they finished the dam after the work of this committee by 1979. So the dam's been there for quite a while. The findings of this committee, based on ranking and elaborating and compiling the costs and benefits of the dam. So the benefits of the dam were for flood control, were for transportation, so barges can get further, you make some locks, and like the amount of navigable area throughout the Tennessee Valley Authority gets bigger. It's going to impound more water, so it's going to add to the electricity generation at that dam and further below, and it's going to add recreational opportunities. It's going to add lakefront development area. More people are going to make marinas and motels that are on a lake, and that's going to add value to the area. So the costs of the dam, on the other hand, were that it wasn't an unpopulated area anymore. They were going to lose 15,000 acres of land and some productive farmlands and some farmers and farm families that had been there for a while and were productively farming. There were also a series of cultural heritage sites, Native American sites that were along the river that probably in 1936 hadn't been categorized or elaborated. Now there was documentation about these Native American sites that could show that there was value there. And there was this question of habitat in this species, the snail darter, which had only been identified in this one area. So there was a whole bunch of costs, and we think about these costs in terms of like, there's now an expert committee in 1976 that's elaborating these, and some of these costs probably hadn't been identified or hadn't even, couldn't be measured or couldn't actually be, the techniques weren't there to actually value them in 1936 or 1967. So there's a special committee of experts is created. Their recommendation was to not complete the dam. Their finding was it would cost $35 million to finish the dam, but it would flood $40 million worth of land, plus the value of the archaeological sites, plus the scenic value of the river in its natural state. So it's a story where the expert committee that's commissioned, compiling costs and benefits, says don't do the project. But the senator that's been tugging and pushing and trying to shepherd this thing through makes sure that it gets built anyways. So there's a lot of different people basically doing the benefit cost analysis. There's this authority, this government-run Tennessee Valley Authority that's sort of like part of the, an autonomous part of the federal government. They say the benefit cost analysis is positive. There's environmentalists trying to protect the natural state of the river, trying to protect the snail darter, and there's a group of economists that are brought in, ostensibly, objective of the environmentalists, just to do this benefit cost analysis. And they find that it's negative. One of the big reasons that this is a famous story or like a famous anecdote to keep track of is the Endangered Species Act itself went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court found that the federal government did have a mandate to protect endangered species. And this law was well written by Congress, and that the way the legislature could, the executive branch could use this law to protect endangered species and change behavior on federal projects. So the Tennessee politicians, including this incredibly powerful Senate Majority Leader, for them, the benefit cost analysis was positive, and they found a way to just ad hoc exempt this project from the Endangered Species Act. Do you have a question? Some they do. Like, that's not exactly that $40 million number. I mean, I don't know the details of the case because it's a long time ago, but I think there is some buying people out. Like, you do have to move some people, and roads and schools, and the government's responsible for that. And that was one of the reasons, like, just don't do this. It's going to cost us so much just to like move people out of the way. But I think economists also sort of add on like the value of the product of what that's producing, and that probably isn't part of the 40 million. So it's like part an actual cash payment and part not. But yeah, now when you build a freeway or they're a big high-profile one is the high-speed rail to Los Angeles, and like where that's going to go and whose farmland they're going to take away. And the state has the power of eminent domain. The state can go in and take people's land and pay you a price for it and build a high-speed rail through there if the state wants to. But what's the price that's paid? How long does it get caught up while they're fighting over the price that's paid? And the people in the Central Valley are fighting it tooth and nail. There's like they're fighting that it'll go through their farmland pretty seriously. Some of it's like cynical, like, oh, they just want to get more money. They want to get like millions of dollars per acre or something that's like totally out of proportion with the artichokes they're growing there or whatever. But I guess they don't grow artichokes in Silicon Valley. The alfalfa or something much lower value that they're growing there. Okay, continuing on. Endangered Species Act. So here we'll be on the side talking about Endangered Species Act. We've already talked about the Endangered Species Act a few times in this class, sort of separately, but from the first day, gray wolves, right? This was a project of Endangered Species Act. There was a nonprofit involved litigating and providing funds for mitigation for gray wolves, but they were threatened. They've been successfully reestablished their population, and the health of their status is better. A really big one is spotted owls, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in forestry, in the forestry section in a couple lectures. But spotted owls were a big, like when I was your age, everyone knew what a spotted owl and a marbled murrelet were. Like these two really rare species of birds that happen to live in old-growth forests only. And the spotted owl not only happens to live in old-growth forests only, they happen to have to need a huge extent of old-growth forest just to have one mating pair. If there's like another spotted owl in that old-growth forest, they get anxious and they need to have like a huge amount of old-growth forest just to themselves. Same with this, the bird, the marbled murrelet, lives its life on the ocean but flies in and wants to make its nest in the top of an old-growth tree. So these were really big, and we'll talk about how they basically caused a stoppage of a huge economic activity, which was old-growth forestry in spruce forests and in California redwoods that sort of ground to a halt with litigation over how to protect this owl. I think we talked about a little bit. We'll talk about the water part too. There's the salmon in the Sacramento River. There's also a smelt in the Sacramento River, but in California fighting about what we're going to do about water, there's an Endangered Species Act in the background. a really interesting part about this we can talk about later is, so we're in a drought year, right? And the beginning of the drought, you're like, what are we going to do about the drought? And there was a headline that I'll have to find and bring in where it says, like, Senator Boxer and Senator Feinstein are going to come up with more water. And you're like, well, how does a senator come up with more water? Like, that's really weird. And basically, they were going to change the federal mandate about how much water was going to be allocated to salmon. They were like, okay, we're just going to make an end run, and we're going to reduce the amount of water that's required for the salmon, and we're going to let the farmers have more water. You know, you're like, well, that's different than saying that they're going to find more water, right? That means they're going to like change an allocation. That's through Endangered Species Act and environmental impact statements, a whole bunch of different things. So the other one that I've showed you pictures of and stuff is this land tortoise in the Mojave Desert. You know, the critical habitat where they're doing these giant solar projects, the Ivanpah Bright Source Project to have concentrating solar. So we talked about how, and I showed you actually their permit where they're allowed to kill a few of these turtles, few mature turtles a year, and maybe they're allowed to kill like 100 or 200 baby turtles per year. And they're allowed to bulldoze 50 or 60 turtle nests per year. And that's, you know, all part of this sort of like litigation about what our land tortoise is going to survive us building these big solar plants. Now that the solar plant's online, maybe they're going to build more solar plants, so maybe it will go on for the tortoise. And then we had this one about the Tellico Dam, the snail darter. So anybody else have an endangered species they know about, part of the news? There's a lot of these, and they're all over the place. There's one in San Francisco. There's like a butterfly, a rare butterfly that like is on the top of Bernal Heights or whatever. So the more science we do, the more endangered species you can find. A funny thing about endangered species, the harder you look, the more you can find them. So it is sort of like the more like botany and biology and ecology that we do, the more endangered species we can identify. So that's a confusing part of it. It's not just like there's a set amount. No, it did not. They later found more snail darters somewhere else, which happens with this. You're like, oh no, the snail darter is going to go extinct forever, and then you do the project. And you're like, oh, actually, there was a snail darter over here. But they didn't know that at the time they were making the decision. Yeah, it's confusing. It's like the salmon. You know, the salmon are all out in the ocean. You never know whether they're going to come back each year, right? So this year, like, not enough salmon are going to get into the ocean, but next year there could be like a whole bunch of salmon that come back. It's like 5 years from this year that those that are born this year maybe won't come back. So there's definitely a lot of mystery and like not a lot of science. The wolves have radio collars on, right? And there's like people in helicopters and drones and like watching the wolves. They got maps of them, and they have 22-year-old grad students with backpacks like with little radar things finding them and all this stuff. You know, the wolves they did a ton of science. They figured out where they are. But spotted owls, some salmon, like it's really hard to do to know what sort of the populations are, and our estimates of populations are approximate, and they go up and down with environmental causes and hurricanes, and we don't really know. So Endangered Species Act, there's a lot of history here, I think I talked about early on in one of the first lectures about the American bison. There were millions of bison roaming the plains. People went out, shot them all. The federal government offered you money to eliminate the bison so we could free up this land to plant there. People rode across the trains across the prairie just shooting bison for fun. A lot of bison, like a lot of the native peoples, actually died of diseases brought by all of the cattle that we brought with our diseases from the old world. Gray whale, so this is a big one, California. It's an amazing environmental amenity that we have here. If you guys haven't been, you should totally go. It's amazing. A chance to watch whale migration from land here. You can go to Point Reyes and go out to Lighthouse and the whales are going by, or you go to San Mateo Coast. You can go in the right week and there'll be like 20 or 30 whales will go by that day, and you sort of stand on the cliff and have your picnic and watch whales go by. It's really a stunning part of California natural history. I just learned about into the 70s there was a whale harvesting plant near where is now the Richmond Bridge, and they would like go out in a ship just off the Golden Gate, bam bam, shoot whales, tow them back through the bridge into the 60s and 70s, and make it into dog food. So whale meat, dog food. It's something you think of like whale hunting. I think of like Moby Dick and like New England like 200 years ago, right? And this is like the Bay Area in 1970. They were like harvesting whales for dog food to put it in cans for people. So it's pretty recent. The whooping crane was a big one. It's a beautiful animal. They were hunted all through the East Coast. Wetlands were built up and developed, and freeways and mini malls laid out in a lot of the marshes that they needed. Some of these big beautiful species need a lot of habitat. They're not like ducks where like 50,000 will land in one place. And a big one was our national symbol. The bald eagle was an endangered species. Anybody remember or ever heard of why the bald eagle became endangered? DDT, so there was a chemical that was applied on lands, but the bald eagle's like the apex species. The accumulation of the effect of DDT was that it would make their eggshells thinner, and so they would lay their eggs and they would be crushed in the nest. So DDT's been phased out, so that effect's been phased out. And there's lots of protections for bald eagle and protections for bald eagle habitat, but bald eagle's a success story. Bald eagle and the gray wolves are two of the ones where like their healthy populations are back. They got delisted, it's called. Talk about listing here. So Endangered Species Act, sort of how it works. So the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, fish and wildlife. So you see the background. Sort of originally these services were for like hunting and fishing, the commercial activities, and now they're evolved into environmental agencies that are protecting fish as a resource and protecting wildlife as an environmental amenity. I think in California it's still called Fish and Game. So if you call an animal a game, what do you think about it? What are you going to do to game? Hunt them, string them up. If it's wildlife, you think something else about the animal. You think like, it's probably good to have it running around there wild. I don't have to shoot it to have an economic value from it. So they have biologists that maintain this big list of species, right? This word list is really big with Endangered Species Act. Fish and Wildlife Service, you can go to their website, you can look at the list, and it's not just animals. They now have plants. There's, mollusks on there. There's like rare snails. There's rare plants. There's rare butterflies. And then with each species comes a story of what, a report and a story of what the actions are that could protect it, what the critical habitat would be, what would be ways to keep this population alive, and what the big risks are to the population. A big thing that happens when an endangered species is listed or not listed, just putting it on